All right.
I like that
So
Zoom tells you that, by the way. That's so handy.
I know, I love it. I love it. Um, this will be as raw as I can allow it to be, because I'm all about representing autistic
Mhm.
characteristics in a positive light, and it always seems like um maybe trailing off or not having the answer right away is always seen as a negative, and it's kind of like edited away. And I'm like, no, 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 this is what autism looks like.
Sure.
And so um I it's all raw. So
Yeah.
if there's a particular part you do want to edit it out, let me know. I will cut it
Okay.
out.
Sure. Just, don't make me just don't like, how like on reality TV they'll pick somebody and be like, we're gonna edit them to, be
Yes.
the bad guy, or just don't edit me together so that I'm saying something awful.
It's funny. Okay, because last session, I had Dave Cat on,
Okay.
and if you know who that is,
I
he
don't think so.
okay, so he is a really
Mhm.
big figure in the idolater community,
Okay.
and he was on My Strange Addiction in 2011, and a couple of
Oh.
other
Mhm.
he was on a couple of other documentaries
Mhm.
about uh people with dolls as
Sure.
partners.
Mhm.
And they they had okay, so he had told the way they okay so the way they filmed him is they did like 3 days of filming and had hours and cut maybe 10 minutes of it, and
Mhm.
kind of made him look like he was like super mentally unhealthy,
Yep.
delusional, some kind of recluse. And then they
Yep.
had this psychologist come in,
Mhm.
and like he didn't have anything substantial to say
Mhm.
about the way Dave Cat was living, because he has friends, he has a job, he's not the social recluse that they're trying to make him out to be. And then when he leaves,
Mhm.
they're like, "Oh well, Dave Cat didn't take the advice and bought another doll." And it was like, but the thing is, before they even started filming,
Mhm.
he had told them weeks
Mhm.
prior that he was
Mhm.
going to, and so they made it seem like he
Sure.
had doubled down on,
Is owning dolls such a bad thing? Like,
I
is he
guess.
making rent
Uh,
payments because he maxed out his credit cards on dolls, or?
no, no, it was, you don't have a real girlfriend, and that's not healthy, and since she's
Okay.
not real, this is a fantasy land, and it's tearing your life apart, even though
Is it tearing his life apart though?
it wasn't. It never has. It was
Mhm.
sensationalism, because
Sure.
at the time he was an oddity. He was a rarity. The
Sure.
way he described it was that it was a modern freak show, which is fair, you know.
That's kind of what those shows are. Yeah.
But this episode, I wanted to
Mhm.
focus, because I know we had touched base just a little bit with him last
Mhm.
time about how um, people, while though it becomes an oddity to them, how these sorts of things
Mhm.
could benefit the neurodiverse community. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, I don't think we're ever going to see like prescriptions for people who can't
Mhm.
have that kind of partnership, but
Mhm.
uh, for it to be a negative is
Mhm.
um, some sort of it's like cringe culture. Like cringe
Oh,
culture
sure.
almost
Mhm.
entirely is centered around any sort of neurodivergence, like
Sure.
a point and laughing circle. And
Yeah.
this episode, I wanted to focus on why it is that the medical community, or the medical academia, or I guess why why it seems like um, peer reviewing our life experience
Hmm.
is much more valuable from someone with a piece of paper that says that they've learned from another person who had a piece of paper about our life experience, and why our as the autistic community, our say so is merely taken as anecdotal and valueless. And I also kind of wanted to go over the history of that. So if people don't know, I don't know how much you know about it. And I don't mean to info dump on you. I'm not going to be
Oh,
like
go ahead.
talking over you the entire time. But um, there was I want to say the greatest
Hmm.
starting point. I don't mean like fantastic. I mean, like the largest starting point was Dr. Gross and Ernst Dilling and Dr. Hans Asperger in
Mhm.
Project T4.
Yep.
And a lot of the stuff that they learned about us was
Mhm.
merely a profiling before executing us.
Yep.
And
Which
while
ones
the
should we
majority,
keep around?
huh?
Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Which ones are useful to us should we keep around because we can put them to work? And which ones do we just put down because
Right.
they're not useful to us?
Right. How can we spot them quicker? How
Mhm.
can we spot them to root them out quicker? And
Mhm.
the majority of what was learned apart from that
Mhm.
was taken by another doctor.
Mhm.
I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was the doctor that theorized the refrigerator mother theory.
Oh, with
And
schizophrenia,
huh?
with schizophrenia or
Oh, with autism, that
oh,
people
okay.
who were born with autism didn't get enough love as a child from their mothers, and so now they're autistic.
They said the
And
same thing about schizophrenia for a while.
yes, so
Too
just
distant. Yeah.
neurodivergency in
Mhm.
general, it seems. And then from there, they also theorized that we had no empathy either because
Mhm.
of it, and wanted to test that theory. I think it was in the 60s or 70s
Mhm.
that they did that, and it was such a jank test. It was, if you know about more about the test, please speak up. But the test was,
Mhm.
they took a doll, two dolls, and they said, "All right, this is Sally, this is Mary. Mary went to go play outside, or Mary went to go play outside. Sally took Mary's doll and hid it. When
Mhm.
Mary came back, oh,
Mhm.
now where do
Where's
you
the
think? What do you
doll?
think Mary thinks?" And they're like, "Oh, well, Mary would think it's under the basket," and they would be like, "Okay, well, the autistic people don't have empathy because if they did, they would know that that Mary wouldn't have any way of knowing that."
But that's not even a test of empathy.
That's not. It's not even. It's
That's not
not.
what you're measuring.
But for years, for decades, that was taken. Oh, that was peer reviewed. We trust our doctors more than we trust you.
I've said there's a thing that I've said before. Actually, a friend and I made a coloring book last year because everything, and we just like put like snarky quotes. And one image that I put together that's in that book says, "Peer review is useless if my peers are incompetent."
I love that. That's beautiful. Um, so with with that, I love that. I'm gonna steal that. I'm gonna steal that.
Do
I'm gonna steal that.
it.
Um, uh, with that being said, you've shared a bit of your experience with me regarding whether or not you're autistic, and they've cited some very just simply disgusting disgusting reasons as to why you possibly couldn't be. If you want to tell us a bit about your
Sure.
experience with coming to figure out how, and how maybe your peers have treated you different. I would love to hear more about
Sure.
you and your journey.
Sure. So I'm probably going to bounce around a little bit because that's what I do. But basically, so like 10 years ago, when I was in my early 20s and I was like looking at grad school, the person who we were best friends from first to sixth grade, but she was diagnosed. And I think at the time it was still Asperger's in the DSM. But she told me she was diagnosed, and I was, as learning psychology, I was like, wait, what? And she listed these things that how they had diagnosed her. And my reaction at the time was, she must have been misdiagnosed because we both do that. Um, over the years, I was kind of like, well, maybe she was diagnosed accurately, and there's a reason we both do that. But I was kind of thinking, because I have a doctorate in clinical psychology, and my rationale wasn't the one that they gave me, but my rationale was, if I was, someone would have said something to me by now, like one of my professors, my supervisors, somebody would have been like, hey, you know that this might apply to you. I felt like someone would have brought it to my attention. But then more and more I started learning about masking, because actually I had to unlearn a lot after my graduate program. because there's certain things like with autism and ADHD, you're supposed to document behaviors across settings, and if someone is not behaving that way at school but they do at home, that was considered okay, well then they're not autistic, because if they were autistic they'd be autistic at school. So I had to unlearn, like, okay, well, no, masking is a thing. People can present differently in different environments, which frankly everybody does. I don't know anybody who's exactly the same. Nobody talks to their boss the way that they talk to their partner or their parents or their friends. Like, everybody does that. It's a thing. I don't know why it's assumed that people can't. But then I kind of thought about it more and more, and then pandemic happened, and with working from home, some things amplified for me with that added stress. And then I was reading about how it's something that you're born that way, but it might not be apparent until, and the quote that I was reading, I don't remember. I read a lot of things. I don't remember exactly which thing said this, but it said sometimes the difficulties don't manifest until demands exceed resources. And I noticed in my own practice that I started getting a ton of referrals from adults starting about the summer of 2020 and continuing. And I'm like, a lot of people are hitting that point where their demands are exceeding their resources. COVID was the thing. So finally, I was like, okay, this might be something that applies to me. And I kind of internally accepted that. And I was thinking through, do I want to get formally diagnosed? And as I was learning more about it, I was becoming more vocal and active. And my thought process was, self-diagnosing is absolutely a valid thing. Not everybody has the option to get tested. I'm fortunate. And not everybody has the opportunity to get tested by someone who's going to accurately diagnose them. But I was like, well, if I'm going to be, if I'm going to be an activist around autism, I want to be sure, because I want to stay in my lane if I'm not, because there's still that kind of self-doubt there. But if I am, it's also important for people to know to hear my voice and my experience. So another challenge that I ran into is I'm in South Dakota, and I'm a psychologist in South Dakota. So everybody in the area who would have expertise in that, I have a pre-existing professional relationship with. And, there's a reason we're not supposed to treat our own friends and family, because you're not unbiased. Right. So I did figure out, and it ended up the people who tested me have been a referral source for me before and continue to be. But basically there's a loophole in the ethics code. Dual relationships are discouraged, but they're not prohibited. And one of the exceptions is if you're in a situation where either I have the dual relationship or this person doesn't get care, I can have a dual relationship, because the alternative is so I basically found someone who felt comfortable having that dual relationship with me. But they usually didn't test adults. They usually evaluated children. When they got a referral for an adult, they would tell that adult to call me. But they couldn't tell me to call me. So we ended up doing the testing. And it was a long day, and they checked for a bunch of things. They ruled out, like, they tested my hearing to make sure that wasn't an issue. And I filled out a bunch of things, and my husband filled out a bunch of things. And they asked me a ton of questions, and they asked him a ton of questions. And I did the ADOS, and I don't like I don't like, at least being on the receiving end of the ADOS. I did not enjoy it very much. I found it very stressful. Yeah. And at the end of the day, you wait while they meet, and then they come back and tell you their diagnosis right there, which is actually kind of nice. You don't have to wait. But they told me I had ADHD. But they said that they didn't think that I met criteria for autism. And I will say, I feel like they very closely followed the letter of the DSM. So I don't think that they committed malpractice or anything like that. But I think that it really speaks to that the DSM is not fantastic. And the DSM is very deficit focused and very based in that research of it can only look this one specific way, and autistic people don't have empathy, even though we know that's not true, and autistic people can't mask. And so they were talking about different things that they were like, like they said, we don't think that you stim. And I said, okay, well, what are these behaviors then? And they said, that's fidgeting. And I said, okay, what's the difference between a stim and a fidget? And they didn't really have, like, I don't remember their exact words, but I remember being like, okay, so you don't actually know the difference between a stim and a fidget. You probably think stimming is like, if it's not this, if you're not flapping your hands a very specific way. Yeah, exactly. Then it must not be stimming. And I'm like, okay, well, right now I've got my little, and I've got a drawer of stim toys right here, by the way, because I've been doing, I love telehealth because I can have something down here in my lap and it's not distracting my client. But they said it's not stimming, it's fidgeting. They said that I'm married. But then they were like, autistic people can be married, but you're married. So I don't completely understand why that was even mentioned. They were acknowledged.
I've never heard that.
Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
But I've never heard that.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, I totally expected them to have a completely rigid, autistic people are completely self-unaware. They cannot have empathy. Like I expected that, but okay, the doctorate, being married,
yeah. They're like, you're married, but they did say autistic people can be married, but so I don't know why that was mentioned at all. But they're like, well, one of the reasons is you're married, but we know that autistic people can be married. But they're like, you have these long-term friendships, and I'm like, yeah, all my long-term friendships either have ADHD, autism, or think that they have ADHD or autism. And then the other thing was when they were asking me about special interests, I talked about my job, because that was the other thing. When I was on the fence about getting tested, an autistic person who came for testing asked if I was, and I feel like that's a fair question when you're getting evaluated.
Yeah.
And I said I said that I didn't know. And they said that the way that I talk about my job sounded like them when they were info dumping about their special interests. And I was like, oh, okay. But they did say that your job is not a special interest. But I don't know what's more special interesty than I want to do this thing 50 hours a week.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Okay. I have my special interest right now. I'm trying to make my job, because it's the only thing I want to do.
Exactly.
Why wouldn't I? If I can make a living off of it, oh, well, that's not, your job isn't a special interest.
Right.
That's just...
Okay. Tell that to Elon Musk, by the way. I mean, he's not my favorite guy, but like, don't say your job can't be a special interest. What do you think he's doing?
Right. No. So like I was saying, I completely expected.
Yeah.
So with my journey, it was also a religious, it was like a religious experience. Like my growing up, I had a couple of therapists say they suspected me of having Asperger's, or in this case, just autism. And I've only ever made friends. It felt like, oh, I was only friends with the weirdos, but those weirdos had autism and ADHD and schizophrenia and things like that too. And those people I've managed to be friends with like my whole life. And so I've been on the receiving end, and I was never quite sure. It always felt like there was this veil of like information, like, okay, how are they really gauging whether or not I'm autistic? Like when I was in high school, I went plenty to like a psychiatry. I've been in and out of the psychiatrist office and a therapist office my whole life. I know quite a bit, because it was also something I wanted to go to college for. Thanks, Mom. That got ruined for me. But I when I was in therapy, and I was like, look, there's, at this point, with all of these symptoms and things like that that I so heavily identify with, there's no way I don't have autism. And they're like, well, you need to be open to the possibility that you're not, because you seem pretty normal to me. What would it change? What would it change if you had autism? And I went through like two or three different therapists, and they all kind of came like, what would it change? It would change a lot. First, okay, it changed a lot for me. It's just like I had to unlearn. I realized that a lot of the masking tools we use to cope isn't about coping with autism. It's about coping with the differentiation in communication with neurotypical and holistic people. I'm not coping with my autism. I'm coping with you. Okay. And the all the things that would stress me out was these. I always wondered why I was so high strung and stressed out all the time, and my mental health was always so terrible. And it was these stress factors. And these stress factors came in the form of these masking techniques I wore around, I carried on my shoulders and on my back 24/7. And I that diagnosis allowed me to release those. I allow myself to hand flap. I allow myself to not look people in the eye. I allow myself to take a break from loud noises and harsh lights and things like that now. Beforehand, it was just like, oh, well, it's just me. There's something going on, and now I know how to deal with it. But for it to be so much more rigid than I had first expected. Like I knew that they were expecting me to not be self-aware in any capacity. Just say from medical professionals to even employers, I get this energy that they're expecting me to be completely mentally incapacitated, that I should not have the skills of any other autistic or neurotypical person, solely based on their expectations.
Sure.
And for them to bring your marriage into it, your doctorate into it, for them to just completely dismiss and gaslight you about your job being a matter of whether or not you're autistic, that's infuriating.
Sure. And I did, by the way, my ADOS score was consistent with autism. But they said that sometimes people with ADHD get a false positive. But I would like to see that data, because I'm wondering, do people with ADHD get a false positive, or do some people have both?
Well, some people with PTSD also get a false positive for ADHD. And I have PTSD. Sure. And autism, so that was like a concern. People are like, oh, we have ADHD. Oh no, it just turns out you're incredible. I went through some shit. Sure. But man, and then for them to use this information to then decide that you're not worth hiring, or that you're not worth the investment, is also infuriating. Like their idea of who's worth investing into is so clinically rigid. Sure. You can't peer review somebody's like life, like their life experience. You don't know what's in their head. You don't know how they're calculating things. And for that to be legitimized over the words of autism, like we in the autistic community have been screaming about these sorts of things being completely invalid, and they don't listen until they're like, oh, hey, turns out doctors found out this thing. And it's like, yeah, thanks. We've been screaming that since 1986. But I where that's coming from, have you ever had any sort of conflicts in college or in the workplace where their expectations for, I want to say, their expectations for patients, or has it affected how you've been treated by any means? Has it what's
I'm not sure, because, well, my employer, as far as I know, is not, unless he's listening to this, Hi, Doug. But I haven't really talked about it at work. I mean, I have coworkers who have ADHD. Just happens they tend to be the ones that I hang out with the most. I know that I sometimes struggle, and this was an issue in graduate school with there are certain things that they'll be like, this is optional, but they don't mean that. And I ran into problems because they'd be like, this is optional. And I'd be like, oh, cool. I'm super busy. That's something that I can push to the side and focus on other. And then, well, why didn't you do it? You said it was optional. They're like, well, we say that, but you're supposed to do it. So I did run into like some of the communication kinds of things because I'm like, if it's like, I'll do it. Like, I will do whatever you need me to do, but I need you to tell me that you need me to do it. Like, it's not.
Yeah. That's one of those.
Mhm.
I really wish holistic people would just say
Yeah.
what they mean.
Just tell me what you want from me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
I guess that's where I'm getting at is
mhm.
because the autistic community is
Mhm.
delegitimized, um, academically speaking, does that affect, has that ever affected, I guess maybe you answered the question, had that ever affected how people viewed the legitimacy of what your opinion was?
I think I get I'm very privileged in a lot of ways. But I think people cut me slack because like I work with like I've been more and more doing diagnosing with adults because it's very hard to find someone who's willing to work with an adult who needs a diagnosis for whatever
Mhm.
reason. So primarily I work with children. So a lot of things about me that are like odd or unusual or eccentric, it gets written off as, oh, you work with kids. So like I've got one of these with the where the octopus can be happy or sad.
Yeah.
And I saw this on a Facebook ad and I was like, oh my God, I want an octopus that can have different feelings. And I bought it. And people were like, oh, that's so cute. Did you buy that for work? And I'm like, yes,
Yes.
that's why I did this. And or I've got leggings that I wear for work that have all these like fun patterns on them. And people are like, I bet the kids love that. And I'm like, yes, I dress this way because kids like it. So, or like my hair. Oh, I bet the kids think it's so cool that your hair is blue. And I'm like, you know what? I dyed my hair blue because I wanted blue hair. It
I
used
know,
to,
because the kids was,
yeah.
yeah, that it's like there's this air of like, oh well, if you do this then you're not a serious person. I was also
Yeah.
someone who before, okay, so I it's funny you're saying that. I'm
Yeah.
looking at all my little action figures and plushies and things. I'm always like buying things like that interest me.
Yeah.
I've got my
Mhm.
special interest hung up on the wall in front of me. I got here. You know what? I'm gonna show you.
Yeah,
Hold on.
sure.
Okay, let's see here.
Mhm.
Got it all uh hung up here. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh,
I,
kind of. It's a little, if you can go a little higher. Oh, oh my God. I know what that is, but the name is not.
oh, it's Raven from Teen Titans.
Yes, Teen
Is
Titans. That's what
yes.
it,
I
yeah.
love I love
Yeah.
that. I'm friends with Tara Strong. It's great.
Sure.
I have it's
Mhm.
I'm a very serious
Mhm.
person until
Sure.
someone shows me like a funny little knickknack that's in the shape
Sure.
of like Robin or Raven or something, and then I
Yeah.
become 9 years old all over
Sure.
again. But
Yeah,
uh,
I think
I,
a lot of my oddness people are like, "Oh, do you do that for work or what?" And I'm like, "No, I
yeah,
do it for me, but I happen to be in a position where I can like kind of use that as an excuse. As no,
yes,
I am serious, even though my hair is a weird color. My hair is a weird color because it helps the kids connect with me. You still have to take me seriously, and
yeah.
you should
I,
just take people
you
seriously.
can't like because yeah, and I think that
Yeah.
has to do with again, that has to do with some kind of cringe culture. What's not like okay, when I was before I had transitioned and I was still in my like, haha, I'm totally a nerdy guy. I'm totally a man. Haha, like I
Mhm.
dead ass would still go into like the kid because you go into like the adult section where like the rucksacks are. They wouldn't have no
Mhm.
cool backpack, so I went into the kid
Oh,
sections and got one with like a monster face or something on the back of it, something cute. I was carried like a um I think even now, I don't have it on me, but my purse is a big plushy Baphomet head,
Aw,
and my other purse is a big like kitty,
yeah.
like,
Oh,
and
my first
so
Stegosaurus.
yes, I so it's like, okay, I at first it was like, oh well, I have an aesthetic about it, and then
Mhm.
it was, you know what? There's no shame in this. When they say like, oh, what do you do this for? Like, I'm autistic.
Because I
I
like,
do autistic things.
sure.
So what do you expect from an autistic person than to do autistic things? I like this. It's cute. I'm going to wear it. It's different.
Mhm.
But I'm glad that you're also.
Mhm.
I mean, I shouldn't be glad, but I'm glad that that air is also that it's not uncommon to still find even in your profession,
Sure.
because uh I feel like when it came to jobs, I've had so many jobs,
Mhm.
every job under the sun, and it's has everything to do with the lack of accommodation. It feels like there's no room in any
Oh,
professional sense for autistic people.
sure.
And everywhere from doctor now, from your story, everything from shelf stockers to doctors, there's just no room. It feels like there's no room for us.
Yeah.
When I would do job applications
Mhm.
or job interviews, sometimes the job interview would be going great until I'd tell them, oh, and also I'm autistic.
Mhm.
This will include a couple of setbacks, and I'm going to need a little bit of accommodation.
Mhm.
I never hear back from them. But if
Mhm.
I continue to mask
Mhm.
and I don't tell them about it, then I
Mhm.
get the job. Then later I tell them about it, and it's like, oh, well, why didn't you tell us?
Mhm.
Because then you wouldn't hire me because I'm autistic.
Right.
And then it turns into, well, you're a liability. So my autism, like,
Mhm.
no, it's me. I'm a liability.
Sure.
They treat it's like an illness
Mhm.
that has to be invested in, and it's not worth investing in because it's not the be all end all, like the cookie
Mhm.
cutter. They can't apply that cookie cutter
Sure.
um, approach
Sure.
to employment and investment. And
Mhm.
um, for that to be seen even in your profession
Mhm.
is both disheartening, but also like, oh, okay,
Mhm.
well, not everyone else has it easier.
Sure.
It's kind of the same across the board. What would you what would you say, what would be your advice
Mhm.
to autistic people trying to hold a job, or even in your profession, because it's, or what accommodations would you like to be seen? Because um 80% of
Mhm.
autistic people,
Mhm.
I take it back, it was like 82%.
Oh.
Don't quote me. I'm this is memory. 82% of all autistic people in North America are
Mhm.
unemployed or underemployed,
Uh,
due to
mhm.
how employers don't know how to employ us. I'm
Mhm.
I'm on SSI, and
Mhm.
so are 80% of autistic people. My
Sure.
roommates, I live in a house full of autistic people.
Mhm.
One has a PhD in theoretical mathematics, and even he catches shit.
Sure.
And my
Try writing a
other
dissertation without a little bit of hyper focus. That's all I'm saying.
yes,
You want
my
to say doctorate is contraindicated. Okay, you write a dissertation.
right, my other roommates are
Mhm.
also on SSI, and
Mhm.
another one has a part-time job, but they
Mhm.
just cut their hours, and it's like,
Oh.
it feels like no matter what you try to do,
Mhm.
there's no room in the world for you. There's no room in the world for you if you're autistic. They can't capitalize on autism.
Mhm.
And if you're on SSI, the livability of that is just nigh impossible. I can't get a place on my own. I'd be comfortable maybe if I was with a partner that was also
Mhm.
autistic in a one-bedroom apartment and we'd be scraping it.
Sure.
But if, oh, as someone who has
Mhm.
worked so closely with us and
Mhm.
in diagnosing, what would you say
Mhm.
would be the best approach for, or if you had to say, educators and employers to
Sure.
accommodate autism? Like, what should they um, expect to do differently?
Yeah. And I mean, I do wonder that with my evaluation that since such a high percentage are unemployed or underemployed, if they're like, well, you are fully, you are full time, that if maybe there's that like maybe that contributed. I am getting a second opinion. But for me, and again, I'm super lucky. I am in a situation where I make my hours. I decide what days I work. I decide what hours of the day I'm going to work. I have my own office that I get to set up the way that I want it to be set up. And now I've got my home office, which is set up the way that I want it to be set up. So I am very lucky in that sense. I haven't felt like I need accommodations at my current job, but I think a lot of that is because it is set up in such a way that as long as, there's X number of people that I have to see every week to be considered full time. And as long as I am making that minimum and my clients are happy with me, my boss is like, do what you got to do. He's very, he's like, let me know if you need me, but clients are happy, you're meeting your minimums. That's all we ask of you. So it's really nice that's so it's kind of, the organization is kind of set up that our therapists, if someone did have something that needed accommodation, it's not really an accommodation anymore, because it's just you get to structure your workday the way that works for you as an individual. And I've seen some of this argued that there wouldn't be a need for accommodations if we did set up with more flexibility and just said everybody can get their needs met, whatever that looks like, instead of, no, this is what it looks like. And if this doesn't work for you, then we're going to accommodate you, instead of, hey, it can look any of these ways and any of these ways is fine, and do what you want. For example, well, she moved away, but someone who did work with me at my practice, who has ADHD, had set her day up so that she got she would see a couple people and then have a very long break and then see a couple more. So instead of like a work day, she kind of had 2 mini work days on the days that she worked. And that was perfect for her. And, in a lot of other industries, that would be an accommodation to have like 2 short shifts with a big break in between. But because my organization just lets people make their own schedules, she was able to set up her day that she just, hey, this is what works for me. That's what I'm going to do. So if we gave people more of that freedom to say, this is what works for me, and then being like, okay, you can do it that way because it works for you. And instead of, no, you have to do it, you have to work 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Those are the hours that people work. Instead of, oh, you want to do your notes at 10 p.m. All right. As long as they get done, then do what you're going to do. But I think that a lot of it is just giving people that freedom to say, here's how I need to do it, and then letting them do it that way.
For sure. From working in plenty of plastic injection molds, I know that there are some places I know I would excel in, but they wouldn't allow it because of a certain lack of seniority or again, accommodation issues. And you're absolutely right that has always been something I've noticed in any workplace. I know that you can't gauge the level of productivity based on something so everywhere, but trusting your employees to do what works for them, you'll see more productivity than if you were to force feed them what your idea of a workday should look like. And as far as healthcare goes, autistic people, so you know, you mentioned a lot of it was children. I didn't get tested as a kid. I was referred to a couple of times, hey, Rachel's mom, you should absolutely probably go get this kid tested. They're hella autistic, man. You could probably go get them tested and get that. It'd be great. We'd like to know for sure. And never happened. And then when I was an adult, it was like living in Ohio or even Tennessee. It was like, oh, well, it's easier to tell with children. And you'd have to have someone staying at your house. And at the end of the day, it's just a piece of paper that says you're autistic. And it's a little more than that. But all right. healthcare being accessible to adults, what changes would you make
Sure.
to the diagnosing process to autistic people for autistic people? I know that they go through their own things, and that they would that some patients would rather see a certain change, but they don't know what. I know they wouldn't be able to articulate because they're not on the inside. So
Sure. It's hard because one of the issues we have with diagnosing adults is that most psych measures for autism cap out at age 18. So we do like there's certain things where there's like rating scales, and we not we I don't do the research side of it, but they give them to like thousands of people, and they'll say, okay, here is how someone that we believe to be neurotypical scores on this measure. Here's how someone who's already been diagnosed, here's how an autistic person scores on this measure. And then they do the statistical analysis and develop what's called the norm reference ratings or the norm reference scores. And then they'll say, okay, when you give this to someone, if they are autistic, their scores will look like this. And if they're not autistic, their scores will look like this. And so that's supposed to tell us, that's supposed to help us know from the testing. And the main problem is that we don't have those type of measures for adults. So for a lot of people who do the testing, they're like, well, I can't get data as an adult. But the other problem is that those measures are very set in kind of, again, the letter of the DSM. And it's like, if you aren't autistic in this one specific way, you're going to get a false negative on those. So I do think we need to, I get why because it's numbers, and it's hard to argue with numbers, and I get why we like numbers, but I think that it's more nuanced than that. And I think that we need to get away from that.
then like a binary yes or no. I didn't know that there was
Yeah.
like a specific age cap for research either. That's something that's new to me.
I don't think
Um,
it's like deliberate, but and there are some measures now that are a little bit better,
yeah.
but there's really just not a lot out as far as like psychological assessments for autism. Most of them are only for children, or like even like I did the ADOS for the ADOS is like considered the best one. They couldn't give me the whole thing because only a couple of sections on it you can administer to adults. Everything else you're supposed to administer, like it's not considered valid if the person's over 18.
Oh boy. That
Yeah.
that brings autism doesn't end at 18
Yeah.
to a whole new level. Like I know like our help,
Mhm.
our support ends at around 18 years old, but as far as
Mhm.
research goes,
Mhm.
I didn't realize that we were still in this like gross Aspergian like
Mhm.
level of like, oh, only children, because that's who they studied. That's who it was
Right.
easy for them. Like they didn't, there was no investment in
Right.
trying to find out
Mhm.
what autism in adults looks like. That we just have a guess based on a binary code, a
Pretty
yes or
much.
no, or a
Yeah.
black or white view.
Mhm.
So is that like because of a lack of funding or a lack of interest or
I think funding is a lot of it. I think that there's this idea, there's kind of this idea that, like, you said that they were saying to you, you're just going to get a piece of paper that says you're autistic. Who cares? Like, what
mm,
does it matter? And I think that that's kind of, oh yeah, after I had my evaluation, I started I'm going to write a book about being diagnosed neuroatypical in adulthood because I feel like we don't talk about it enough.
we
So
don't.
I put this thing out, and I have interviewed over 30 people who got diagnosed as adults, which, you know, tell me I don't special interest, like,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, that's a neurotypical reaction, is to go and talk to 30 people and to like write a book about it. um Sorry, that got me off track.
Yeah.
But I think part of the issue is a message that a lot of these people got when they were going to get tested was, well, you made it this far, so you've obviously figured something out. Why do you need to know? Why do you need the label?
It's just,
And
it's like it's
yeah,
so much more than a label. It's what I'm
right.
doing right now to figuring it out. That okay, so what society has done so far is I've gone through my self-inflicted ABA.
Mhm.
Like I've learned how to act not autistic for other people. This is a trick. This is what
Right.
this is. This is a
Mhm.
dog trick.
Yeah.
That's I mean that's what ABA is. It's
Mhm.
dog training. I'm doing a dog. I'm not. this would allow me to be comfortable in my own skin and to know what route to take to unlearn what things are stressing me and causing my mental health to not be what it
Right.
could be. And for that to seem like, oh well, you don't need help after 18. Like, okay, so like childcare, like pediatrics aside, there are plenty of autistic adults that would benefit from some kind of therapy to unlearn certain masking techniques that don't benefit them, and how to not only help with employer relations, but also allow autistic adults to know what they can do to make their quality of life better.
Sure.
And funding not being a part of it, I totally see. But what if you had to speculate, if you had to use conjecture, what would you say is the reason for there not for this lack of interest in
Yeah.
diagnosing adults? Like, is it negligence? Is it just they think that it, oh well, they'll learn, they'll it's sink or swim? Like,
I
do they
think
not?
that's a lot of it because I mean, I would get the like for me, I'm basically too good at capitalism to
Hmm.
meet the DSM criteria as it's written. And like that doesn't
Yeah, because we're not good with money. That's
right.
we
Oh
don't
yeah,
understand money.
you
Like,
can't be good
yeah,
with
I
money.
understand.
Yeah. Um, live on an SSI budget and be good with money. I don't think that's possible. Like that are you bad with money or do you just not have enough of it? Like there, that's its whole own other
Dude's like,
conversation.
we
But
talk about a living
yeah,
wage.
yeah, like okay, I'm good with money. I hit a pretty bad round of burnout last year and I didn't stop working, but I was miserable and I was having all these other, psychological issues and my anxiety and I was depressed and I mean, even, the diagnosis I have now is ADHD. And even, is it just the label? Because before I knew that I had ADHD, I would take forever. I'd see a message and I'd be like, I need to deal with that later. And then 3 days would go by and I'd be like, oh my God, I waited too long. And then I'd wait longer and then I'd feel worse the longer I waited. And I would openly be like, hey, I'm a terrible friend because I don't keep in touch and I'm bad at keeping in touch and I'm a bad friend because of that.
It's,
And I just got diagnosed with ADHD 2 months ago. And now
yeah.
I'm like, hey, sorry, it took me so long. I have ADHD, but I promise that I care. And instead of I am a shitty friend, it's I have ADHD and I communicate differently, and that's
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
So I'd like that by itself. That's not even like that wasn't even therapy about my diagnosis. That was literally just my brain saying, oh, I'm not a shitty friend.
Yeah.
I have ADHD, and I answer messages differently than people who don't have ADHD.
That's how I communicated that to the therapist that was like, hey, what would that change? I'm like, well, first off, I could live with the fact that I'm not just an asshole. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not someone who's rude. I'm just autistic. Like, I genuinely don't understand some,
Mhm.
like, I miss social cues, and it's not because I'm negligent of them, because I don't care about them. It's because
Not
I don't
bad, it's
get them. And
different.
it's like, oh, okay, so that's the first off, from an intrinsic value, it's incredibly valuable to know that I can now navigate my own neurotype. Like, I can navigate my own behavior and be more successful because I know, if you're driving in a car that doesn't have brakes and you're wondering why you're not stopping, you're like, oh, well, it just must be how bad of a driver I am. And it's like, well, what would it change if you knew you didn't have brakes? Fuck everything. It would change everything. But boy, to this is this is baffling to me. It's not that I was expecting more, but I didn't realize just how ignorant we really
Yeah.
are about adult diagnoses. I thought maybe there was some kind of like knowledge about it that just wasn't taken seriously, or there wasn't enough research. What does autistic research in adults, what does it even look like?
Yeah.
So far all I've seen is like Spark for Autism, and their focus is in children and curing autism. So I've not, the only research I've seen is from hate groups like Autism
Yeah.
Speaks, and
Mhm.
from things like that to delegitimize or to
Mhm.
cure us or heal us of our evil, mean, nasty autism. But
Sure.
I've yet to see anyone rally for like
Mhm.
employer accommodation or healthcare
Mhm.
accommodation or helping
Mhm.
adults come to terms with the things that like knowing how to unmask
Mhm.
years ago
Mhm.
would have been fantastic. Knowing that false negatives and false positives were a thing in these tests would have been fantastic to know about. I have been diagnosed with schizophrenia, with ADHD, with um, multiple personality disorder, or I guess dissociative personality
Spaghetti.
disorder.
Mhm.
Sorry, but I've not everything except
Mhm.
autism and PTSD. I
Mhm.
finally got the accurate
Mhm.
uh, an accurate diagnosis for PTSD,
Mhm.
but they just don't want to let go of all. It's like
Mhm.
anti-Occam's razor.
Yep.
Like, is it all these complicated? Oh, no,
Everything.
no, you're not autistic. It's all these other
Yeah.
complicated like
Mhm.
mixtures of things and not autism, not
Mhm.
clearly autism.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
so. Despite the last official diagnosis being like bipolar or schizophrenia,
Mhm.
I've just not. I'm autistic.
Sure.
It's clear. It's right as rain. It's clear as
Mhm.
day. Like everything that I've learned to like all the masking techniques
Mhm.
line up 100%.
Sure.
Everything I've done to unlearn them, it
Mhm.
becomes more and more apparent as masking goes
Mhm.
that I am autistic, and I feel like if the medical
Mhm.
atmosphere were
Mhm.
focusing on what people do to mask and how to unmask,
Mhm.
they would see more rather than trying to go by this A and B binary number like this, like we've been
Mhm.
talking about.
Yeah. Because I think as far as like behavior kinds of the only time a behavior is a problem is if it's damaging.
Hmm.
So like if your stim is hitting your head against a wall, no, I don't want you to give yourself a concussion. I don't want you to do that, but it's not, so therefore we need to make it so that you don't stim anymore. It's we need to figure out how to meet that sensory need in a way that's not going to accidentally injure you. And outside of that, there's not really, it's not so much, it's not really behavior modification. Like cringe is not harmful. If it's cringe and it's awkward for you to see, then don't look at it.
Right.
I don't know. That doesn't mean the person has to stop doing it. That just means don't look at it.
Change your
And so I think,
standards.
yeah, right. So, there's like the thing of like adults asking, is it okay to still sleep with a stuffed animal? Who cares? Who is asking what's in your bed? Like,
Yeah, yes,
why are
yes.
we so obsessed with that? Like, what makes, what's making you happy? Is it hurting you in some way? Is it hurting other people in some way? Is it damaging something in a way, like is it like damaging things in a way that it's really like sometimes the picking at the clothing and it's like I keep shredding my jeans and I would like my jeans to last longer. Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
let's find something else. But like outside of that, but people do stuff.
yeah, yeah. So, it's autism awareness needs to. I'm so tired of awareness. People know we're here. They just
Okay.
don't know anything about us. You know,
Autism accuracy awareness.
yes. I was like, hey, autism acceptance month. How about that? Like,
Yeah. Mhm.
uh, uh, autistic people do autistic things, and making them
Mhm.
feel bad for it isn't
Mhm.
going to like magically heal them or whatever you think needs to happen with them. Like,
Mhm.
I'm glad cringe culture as a whole is kind of dying on
Let people be cringe.
the
Let cringe
escape of
be
the internet.
cool.
Yes, because I am. I'm pretty up there. I love it. I the best thing I have done for myself is not letting myself feel conflicted for doing autistic things.
Mhm.
And apart from uh STEM diversion, I
Mhm.
feel like identifying
Mhm.
how do I put this? So there's this sort of
Mhm.
misconception about the spectrum,
Mhm.
being more or less
Mhm.
autistic. I hate that it's always framed as like this light spectrum type of a bar. And I've always told people, no, it's more like a
It's like a
varying pie
circle with
graph.
the, yeah.
Yeah, like you've got a pizza pie here made of a bunch of different factors, right?
Mhm.
And I'm not one of those people who have an aversion to touch. I'm actually very tactile. I'm
Sure.
not hypo empathetical. I'm hyper empathetical.
There's the sensory avoidant versus sensory seeking, and you can actually be both.
Yes.
There are
Yeah.
sensations like, oh my gosh, my husband's a nurse. And right after he wears compression socks because he's on his feet for 12-hour shifts. And I stole a pair of his compression socks because I was like, what are these? And I put them on. And I was like, oh my God, why didn't you tell me about
Squeeze.
compression
Ugh.
socks? This is amazing. And he's like, what are you talking about? They're just tight. Like they're just socks that are tight. And I'm like, I know. And he's like, he was so confused. I'm like, why didn't you tell me? It feels so good. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. But then certain sounds, I'm like, keep it away from me. So it just depends on the thing. You can be both. So
Yes, absolutely. No, I absolutely feel it. I I feel like profiling an autistic person should be based on what factors they
Mhm.
could or couldn't have, as opposed to what
Mhm.
criteria they like. Oh, well, on the list, do they have this or this? It's like, they could have both, right? Like, it doesn't
Right.
have to be one or the other. Like,
Mhm.
I'm also one of those people. Sometimes I I I got copper compression gloves. I was like, so I got a hold of the socks once, and I was like, I need them both.
Mhm.
But I'm one of those people that also like to be squeezed.
Mhm.
Um my partner, I always have her arms or put her around me, and I just
Yeah.
squeeze as hard as you can.
Yeah.
But to hear that having both could discredit me from, or you know uh could not be considered autistic because I don't fit that
Yeah.
box.
I think they need to. The
uh,
problem is that the criteria, first of all, we're a medical model
mhm,
versus a social model. And the medical model doesn't recognize that certain qualities are actually only deficits sometimes.
mm,
Medical model is it only is if it's a deficit, if it's causing you a problem. And I think I said this already, like, try writing a dissertation without a little bit of hyper focus or
yeah,
having a topic that you can special interest in. Like it's very helpful in that specific situation. So like going more to that social model of like, not do these things cause you a problem, but simply just, do you do these things, whether it causes you a problem or not.
yeah,
And I think the criteria is still very much based in that, Asperger, like
yeah.
eugenics kind of standpoint. I think that the criteria should be based on crowdsourcing experiences of the autistic community instead of this dated research. And I think the measures and everything, I think the research should just be done by autistic people
Oh,
and
I absolutely agree. I
stop
couldn't
getting
agree
these false
more.
negatives.
Yes, yes. Because um, going back to T4, it's like the modern eugenics talking points are the same as, or same, or implemented in a social setting as they are a medical setting. It's like, okay, so talking about, does it negatively affect you? It's
Mhm.
weird that, like, keeping a job or like certain capitalistic
Mhm.
sorts of things are implemented here because
Mhm.
Joseph Goebbels,
Mhm.
um, the SS propaganda master himself,
Mhm.
started T4 in 1938 with propaganda about how the German disabled
Mhm.
were a financial burden to the public.
Mhm.
And when in choosing who and who should not go to Antanama, the death camp
Mhm.
they had for us, they got everyone, they went to these hospitals, and
Mhm.
they told people, that not only the people that were there, but people that were outpatients even, to come there.
Mhm.
And you were told to do menial tasks.
Mhm.
And if you didn't do them fast enough, or
Mhm.
you didn't have a skill that was financially valuable to the Reich, you were
Mhm.
put on a gray bus and put out to Antanama, where you were put into a gas chamber.
Mhm.
Um,
If you're
and
not beneficial
interesting.
to capitalism, you're literally considered worthless.
Yes, yeah,
As a
absolutely.
human.
And to
Mhm.
see that still hasn't gone away, I, I really, there are so many people who don't know the story and the origin of this,
Mhm.
of the eugenic, of where we're seeing eugenics. It's like, okay, well, you clearly don't have autism because you're successful in your job. But it's like, okay, so I have to be valueless, I have to be
Mhm.
worthless to be autistic.
Yep.
That's intrinsic to being autistic now, like
Mhm.
being worthless.
Mhm.
It's infuriating. And
Mhm.
how little people know of, sure, every day, the everyday autistic struggle, but the history of it as well. Most people don't even know
Mhm.
that while the beginnings of this were then too, but we were also the gas chambers that were disguised as showers.
Mhm.
Those were first tested on us. We were
Mhm.
the it wasn't the Jews that used them on first, it was the disabled first. And then they used them on the Jews if they were
Mhm.
successful. Like, oh, well, we could successfully trick the disabled into this. It was basically 1938 to 1939.
Mhm.
They were like, all right, well, we have this plan for the final solution. How are we going to test it? Oh, easy. The weakest and most vulnerable group in our society, the disabled. All right, so let's test what we would do to these Jewish rats first.
Mhm.
Let's gather them up on. Okay, so they changed the buses to trains. Of course, they took the buses to trains, and the gas chambers that they used in Antanama were really like rough versions of what would be used in Dachau, like a year
Mhm.
or two later in 1941.
Mhm.
And to see that their line of thinking
Mhm.
hasn't changed societally since
Mhm.
the Third Reich, and it's going next to completely unnoticed,
Mhm.
is very disheartening.
Yeah.
And I've gone plenty to sit and think. It's brought me to tears. Like, I feel like I'm born wrong. I
Mhm.
feel like I wasn't born right. I can't dig myself out of this hole. And a lot of it starts with the diagnosis process. And I'm more than grateful that there are people like you in your profession,
Mhm.
you know, advocating not only for us, but for the change of this system,
Sure.
because we desperately need it. We
Mhm.
terribly desperately need it.
Mhm.
Um, I just, it's,
Mhm.
yes, it means a lot.
Good,
You're
because yeah, because like that's why I'm getting with the second opinion too. I told the psychologist that I found actually was recommended by one of the people that I've been talking to about my book, who was like, oh, I was diagnosed by this person, and so I called her up and I was like, hey, someone said that you're neurodiverse affirming, but what I told her, I was like, listen, if I'm not autistic, then I'm not autistic, but I'm not autistic because of my career.
right. Right. That
So
that still aggravates the shit out of me. They were like, oh yeah, your doctorate. Yeah.
you have
Yep,
a
that's
doctorate.
why.
Oh, I'm kind of annoyed though, because so the thing that really annoys me, and again, I think that they followed the DSM, and I think that I think that from that standpoint they did their job, but I think that the way that we're taught to do our job is wrong. But the thing that annoyed me is that we were looking at the scores and they're like, these scores are consistent with autism, but here's why you don't meet the criteria. And it was all like stuff that they knew about me when I made the appointment. And I'm like, couldn't you just told me that? If you were going to not diagnose me because I'm good at my job, like you knew that when I called you.
That's aggravating. That's, oh,
I had to wait 5 months and spend $1,000. Like you could have just told me that when I called.
oh God. You know,
Get the ADHD diagnosis, and that was the one
mm,
that opened the door for medication. So it wasn't a total waste. But I'm just like,
mm,
you couldn't have.
couldn't have, yeah. Like, well, all right. Thanks for thanks, I guess. What, what you know, I uh I I think the accessibility to autistic, whether or not to be tested, I mean, sure, the process should be changed, but also the accessibility. I've noticed Medicaid doesn't really pay for that,
It
And
does here in South Dakota. I've been able to do it, but some
huh.
states won't. Um, yeah, I've been able to. Although I also wonder too, because and it's funny that I'm pursuing this second opinion, but I'm also like, self-diagnosis is valid, but not mine.
Mhm.
Everybody else's self-diagnosis is valid except for me. But I do kind of wonder about and yes, there are support needs, and often a diagnosis is needed to access support needs, and that's fair, and I get that, but it also used to be you weren't truly considered gay unless a psychologist tested you and
Uh,
like, diagnosed you as gay, or you weren't trans until a psychologist tested you and like diagnosed you as trans. And now it's like, no, you know if you're trans, you don't need me to test you and tell you. So with the do we want to get to that place with autism where we just put the information out there? Hey, here's a thing that exists. Some people are not neurotypical. Here's how it feels to not be neurotypical. If this resonates with you, like going that route with it, that not even, that it's just, if you realize let people figure it out for themselves, like we do with gender and sexual orientation.
I think that is a fantastic take. I've never heard it, I've never thought of it that way. That's one that's funny. I, that come okay. The condition also comes with sort of like a compartmentalization where it's like that I feel like that should have occurred to me, but
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. I feel like if more people, okay, so just from clinical studies, it went from like, oh well, we think maybe it's like 1 in 20 kids to now it's probably 1 in 10, and now it's down to as low as probably 1 in 4 kids are autistic today. 1 in 4 might be,
Wow.
and there was a time when we were like, um, autism might be the next jump in human evolution, uh, or might be like a new divergence.
Mhm.
Um, and I feel like without that need for clinical validation,
Mhm.
we would see far more,
Mhm.
um, help and accessibility in terms of help
Yeah.
to autistic people. I feel like society at large would be kinder
Mhm.
because it would involve far more people, but well, that would understand themselves. That have
Mhm.
vibed very well with a
Mhm.
great number of people who didn't know they were autistic. They're like, oh,
Mhm.
I wouldn't have known that. It's weird that I'm so well able to, like, something I always tell these people. I like, look, I want to get yourself checked, okay? Because if you take a bunch of holistic, you take 10 holistic people and one
Mhm.
autistic person and stick them in the room, they're gonna
Mhm.
find out real quick who the autistic person is.
Yeah. Mhm.
But if you take 9 autistic people, or it doesn't even have to be neurodivergent, autistic, ADHD, schizophrenia, you put them in a room and put an holistic person in the room, all of them will be able to find who the holistic person is
Yep.
because they will be able to communicate amongst each other just
Mhm.
fine, no hindrance. And for other people to be like, well, I couldn't even tell you have autism. Like, we communicate so well. It's like,
Yeah,
there's your first
because
first
you had
sign.
to learn to mask.
Hmm.
Not a deficit, it's a difference. And if anything, autistic people generally can move between groups. Holistic people have a much harder time moving between groups because they never had to.
No. Mm-mm. I I've always said the idea that autistic people are bad at lying has always been ridiculous.
Mhm.
Like, no, we have a hard time hurting people because we're more empathetic than you give us credit for. I have no problem like pretending to be someone else. I have no
Mhm.
problem lying or acting.
Mhm.
Like, I can do that. I do that every day.
A lot of actors are autistic.
Hmm?
A lot of actors are autistic.
Yeah, and I think more than they're willing to talk about or even represent, like,
Right.
Anthony Hopkins and
Mhm.
um, Dan Aykroyd are two of the
Mhm.
biggest
Sure.
currently, but I never hear them come out and talk on behalf of our community or anything. So I feel like,
because yeah, it's like I think for a lot of people, they just want to, they don't want to be like the voice. They
right,
just want to,
right, just be
they just want to be left alone.
right, which
But
I get.
like this pressure of like, oh my God, I've got to speak for, and I've got to, represent and like what, but it's like, but also just want to, be left alone.
That's that's perfectly like legitimate. I would really, yeah, you don't have to. You don't have to be like our spokesperson now that you're in that position.
I love that
But
Anthony Hopkins shared, because he got diagnosed in his 60s.
oh wow.
And so whenever somebody's like, whenever someone's like, well, they said that if I got this far, then it's probably not. I'm like, Anthony Hopkins was in his 60s.
Hmm. And was diagnosed. I mean, it only makes like I really I guess what I'm waiting for is for someone in the media to positively portray autistic people
Yeah.
as like perfectly competent and come out and be like, yeah, hey, turns out I've been autistic this entire time. Here are all the autistic things. Like,
Sure.
be openly, don't mask. Like, be openly autistic. Hand flap on the news when you're doing an interview. Don't look them in the eye. Rock back and forth, but never come across as mentally incapacitated. Like,
Mhm.
never come across as incompetent,
Mhm.
just come across as autistic
Sure.
because
Sure.
we don't really get that. We don't we these things are still viewed as like a deficit, like you said.
Yep.
um this this whole podcast has been very enlightening, and I have so many more questions I
Mhm.
have to ask about uh just simply research. I'm gonna have to do all kinds of research into the research and then get some people to come on for that. But I
Yeah.
really like thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
It means
Of
the world to
course.
me. Your activism means the world to me.
Mhm.
Just what you do,
Mhm.
even in your neck of the woods, is
Mhm.
just monumental to us everywhere, because we
Mhm.
need this
Mhm.
in the medical profession. We need this in the
Sure. Mhm.
psychiatric profession.
Yeah.
Uh,
Mhm.
so uh, I guess I want to say that's all the time I got, but
Okay.
I have all day, but I try to keep these
Yeah.
about an hour.
Makes
Um,
sense. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. Oh, and if if you're looking at like a series and kind of more information, do you know Gummy on Twitter?
I don't know Gummy
Okay.
on Twitter.
Her at is Gummy Pies, Gummi, and then Pies. She was Gummy Pie, but then she got suspended. We could not figure out why. But she is an autistic lawyer who was diagnosed in adulthood, and she has some really good threads on her old account that she's slowly recovering with the, like, I think it's called the Wayback Machine or something.
Hmm.
But is like, here's what it, here are the things that I always just thought was weird. But everything clicked when I got my diagnosis, and like, oh, okay, so she's a good resource too. So
Okay.
yeah.
Is there like if you guys want to, is there anything you want to promote, or like any like
Um,
social things you want to drop, or
I mean, I do. So, oh yeah, sure. So, you
plug?
may have seen with like the database. So I'm in South Dakota,
Mhm.
but I'm also licensed in Montana and North Dakota because I do a lot of telehealth. So all the states where there's like nobody and no resources, I'm trying to help them. But I got licensed in North Dakota, and I learned that North Dakota is one of like 6 or 7 states that requires mental health professionals to register autistic clients with the government. And it is, some states are, I don't want to say better, some states are less bad, but specifically North Dakota and New Jersey require identifying information. Some states just want numbers, like how many diagnoses did you give this year? And that, honestly, that I don't have a problem with. Do we want to know how prevalent something is? I can tell you numbers, but it's like there's a sheet that they have us, that they want us to complete. I haven't done it, but it's got like your name and your diagnosis and where you live and your phone number and like all this very personal information. And if I die, so I actually don't do autism evaluations in North Dakota, because if I don't comply, every client that I don't report, I can get fined $1,000 and I can lose my license.
Mm.
So my solution right now is that I'm just not going to do them because I can't comply with that.
Right.
but I don't have thousands of dollars to pay a bunch of fines. And it's been in effect since 2013. I have spoken to some other psychologists in North Dakota. I cannot find a single psychologist who thinks that it's a good idea. Every single one of them has been like, I'm appalled by this. Everybody who was practicing when this got passed was like, I called, I made phone calls, I went to, I told them don't pass it. I told them it was a bad idea. I hate it. It's egregious. It's terrible. Like everybody I've talked to hates it and agrees that it's bad. But the government is just like, well, it's the law. So like the health department oversees it. And the state epistemologist, I don't know how to say that word, but is like, they're like, no, we need it for research. And I said, you do realize that the data you're collecting, that you're using without that, we said, what if a client doesn't consent? They said, well, don't tell your clients you're doing it.
Oh.
So just do it without their consent. I said, you realize that if you use this data for research, you are in violation of international human rights laws. You cannot do research on people without their consent. And part of why that law is passed is because of research that the Nazis did on autistic people without their consent. You do realize that this is against that. And they're like, well, basically their response has been, well, it's the law. So you have to do it because it's the law. And so, and like they did have someone reach out to me and be like, don't worry, the database is HIPAA compliant. And I'm like, okay, but it's still against the APA ethics code. This American Psychological Association ethics code. It's against the social workers ethics code. It's against the American Counseling Association's ethics code. It's against the Marriage and Family Therapist ethics code. It's against, the consent to research international. And they're like, well, we can't give you legal advice. You're going to have to talk to your licensing board about that. And I'm like, the licensing board people agree with me that it's a bad idea. Like
That's
so they're just like, it's legal because it's legal. And so I've spoken to a couple of legislators, and it's not a perfect. So they don't have a new legislative session till 2023. I don't know what they're doing the rest of this year. If the lawmakers aren't making laws for another year, do they just like get the time off? But I have spoken to a couple of people in the legislature who have said, if this is still a thing when it opens, in the name of it's North Dakota, it's a red state. But in the name of, we agree with you that this is government overreach. We agree with you that people should not be documented by the government. So I'm like, you know what, whatever your reason is for being mad at it, I'll team up with you. Even if it's a different reason. I have reached out to the ACLU, but I haven't heard. I reached out to the North Dakota ACLU, but I haven't heard back yet. And their website basically is like, if we don't think we can help you, you're just not going to hear from us. So, yeah, right.
Oh,
so I'm not really sure what my options are at this point. The other psychologists, like, it sounds like when this passed, they were yelling and screaming and doing everything right to be like, don't pass this law. But then like it did. And then the state government is like, well, it's the law, deal with it. So I'm not
this needs to come to a greater public conscious. Like this really needs to be talked about more than just North Dakota. This gets beyond New Jersey and North Dakota.
Yeah. And like the thing, and also, so I have been rallying against North Dakota because I'm licensed there. I could make noise. I do talk about New Jersey, like I mention it, but I don't really have, because I'm not practicing in New Jersey, they're less likely to care what I have to. They're gonna be like, okay, like, why are you, you don't practice here, you don't live here, why are you calling us? So I've been focused on North Dakota just because the fact that I'm licensed there like gives me that in. But I do wonder about, because part of what they told me was New Jersey had one first. So they're kind of like, well, the North Dakota law is ethical because they allowed it to stand in New Jersey. So therefore it's okay to have it here. So I would like to know, is there a way on the federal level that, because I don't want to be playing whack-a-mole with states popping up these laws when they shouldn't exist anywhere. Um, and so I'm like, is there something, on a federal level that we can be like, don't pass laws like this, they're bad.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that probably the law would be struck down if it were challenged in court. But the problem is it needs to be challenged in court. And I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how I can do that. I'm wondering if it needs to be, and this is awful and this shouldn't be how it is, but if it needs to be like someone who was registered against their will would have to be like the plaintiff in that case. I don't know if that's the answer.
I think it'd be a class
Yeah.
action lawsuit or something like at that point if it was
Mhm.
on a larger scale. I'm not a lawyer, but
Right, me neither.
that seems like a constitutional issue
Yeah.
as well. So you'd probably have to go with like a constitutional lawyer and take it to a supreme level, like a Supreme Court level.
Sure.
Um, that's that's insane. I've not heard about this until
Yeah.
now, and
Yeah. Oh, I
that's
didn't know at all until I went to get licensed, and you have to do like there's so, oh my God, it's getting licensed is a mess. It's very intense. But one of the things I had to do was they sent me a multiple choice test, and they're like, you got it was open book, so they're like, answer all these questions to show that you learned our state laws. And on the test, it was asking me questions about the mandatory autism registry, and I was like, about the
mm,
what? Yeah, I was like, the what? And actually, if you scroll back through my Twitter, you can probably find the day that I was taking that test, because I like stopped the test and I was like, and I was like, okay, I thought I had to be misunderstanding it. I was like, I've got to, there's no way that this is legal. I must be misunderstanding something.
what's the purpose for it? What are they
Somebody,
gaining out of
yes,
this?
somebody look at this and tell me what I'm misunderstanding, because if I'm understanding this correctly, I'm about to get really mad. But no, turns out I was understanding it correctly. It's just terrible. So we did a number of people reported it to the Department of Justice to be like, hey, there's a law that is not ethical and shouldn't exist. I'm sure the DOJ takes a long time to respond to stuff, and I do not like to wait for things. But as far as I know, they haven't gotten back to anybody. So I'm not, yeah, again, I'm feeling disheartened, because I'm like, this should not be a thing, but how do I make it not a thing?
Are we? What's next? Are they gonna like what? Okay, that's
Mhm.
very concerning. That's
Yeah.
very like
Mhm.
that's directly like
Yeah.
okay, what's next? They're gonna start mandatorily identifying us in public. Like, are we gonna have to start wearing little stars and shit now? We're gonna
Yeah, it's like, why are we registering people with the government based on their diagnosis? Like, that's not okay. And like, I have, I do ADHD assessments for North
Mhm.
Dakota, and that's fine. I can do that ethically, because people with ADHD don't need to go on a government registry. But I'm like, what?
Hmm.
Like, yet is this the starting point for, and then,
Eugenics. This
yeah,
is this
right,
is
yeah.
this is this is they're starting with profiling. I feel like
Mhm.
this is getting on a eugenic scale. I really don't like that. I
No,
really,
well, they're
really
like,
don't like this.
yeah, they're like, it's for research purposes and it's to make services available. But then I said, okay, what are you researching? What is your research question specifically?
Don't worry about it.
You still can't use people's identifying information in research without their consent.
Yeah, don't worry about
What are you researching exactly? Yeah. And what services are accessible? Because it's been since 2013. So you've had 9 years.
I
What services are you offering as a result of this database?
don't know.
And I could not get it. They're like, services, it's helping. And I said, okay, specifically, how is it helping? And they're
Yeah,
like,
what are you
it's
doing?
helping. And I'm like, how? But they can't tell me like, hey, here's somebody who like got their SSI faster, because if you're on the database, we automatically approve you, or anything like that. It's just, no, we need to know who all the autistic people are. Yeah.
There's been plenty of talk
Mhm.
about the distaste for
Mhm.
autistic people by the federal government because we're so we're so not immune, but we're very resistant to propaganda and nationalistic ideology. And for them to be like, yeah, well, you need to identify those people to us is very, very concerning. Like on a Third Reich kind of level there. Like that's that that's very that's disgusting. That's mm,
Yeah. And there are more states. So I have been on my blog, I made a list of the states that have the mandatory registries so that people in those states can pursue it if they want to. There are more states that have optional registries, which I will say is less bad, but not good. My main issue with the optional registry is that children cannot consent. So a parent might be like, yeah, put my kid on the registry. And then the kid grows up and is like, what do you mean I'm on the registry? Like,
oh, you mean I'm on a registry?
yeah. So I don't think there should be any registries. If it's going to be, if it's for some type of research, if people want to opt, I don't want to say like, don't research autistic people, but I think it should be autistic
Don't
people
do it
researching the
against
autistic.
our will.
Right, but it should be voluntary. It should be informed consent. Like that's how these things work. I do still have issues again, kids being put on it if they don't want to, or people being like coerced, like it's optional, but you're going to let me, right? Like, so I do
Oh
still
my
worry about
gosh.
that, but my top priority is that it should not be a mandatory registry and it should not contain personal information.
I more than agree with you. This is
Mhm.
something, sorry, it was
Yeah.
gummy pies.
Yep.
This is definitely something I would love to bring up with her.
Mhm.
That I have to know more now. I have
Yeah.
to know more. I is there like a movement or coalition or anything around fighting this? Is there
I am trying to figure that out. I'm hoping that like maybe the Autism Self-Advocacy Network. So Gummy, I don't know her through my work with the registry. She just like happens to be a lawyer. I actually don't even know what kind of lawyer she is. But yes, I'm trying to figure that out. And I don't know if it's just that there's so much stuff that it's like no, maybe there's just not the extra space for this, I guess. But I'm like, okay, so how do I make it? Like what do I got to do? So working on it. So, no, Gummy does a lot of educational threads about what autism can look like and like knowing yourself better and like neurodiversity affirming kind of stuff like that.
that that's such a great help. Thank you
Yeah,
so
yeah.
so so much.
Mhm.
Is there anything else we want to say before you
I
chatting
don't
now?
think. I mean, I can talk forever, honestly.
Same, same.
But
Yeah.
I don't.
Unfortunately, though, I think Facebook only lets me post
Sure.
up for a certain
Oh,
certain amount of time. So
oh,
I
sure,
do,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, but if
um,
you could send me the link when it's done, I'll tweet it.
oh, for sure, for sure.
I have
Uh,
a Facebook page, but honestly, it's really just to share blog posts. I don't really do anything else with it.
I feel it.
Yeah.
So, what was your Twitter handle?
Oh, sure. The Dr. Amy Marshall. We were. I think you DM'd me this link, but I
Oh
can.
no, I did. I just for
Okay.
the people listening,
Oh, sure.
if
Sorry,
they
Dr. Amy Marshall, and then Marshall is Marschall. The C trips people up. Yeah.
Germanic.
Might be easier to Google though,
Yeah,
because there's not as many. There are still other Dr. Amy Marshalls with my spelling. Well, there's one doctor. There are other Amy Marshalls with my spelling, but there's a doctor of German literature in North Carolina. Yeah, but
yeah. I
I don't know about her stance on any of this because I don't think I've ever spoken to her.
Saudi and South Carolina.
I just know we
Well,
have the same name.
that's been Amy Marshall, everybody. Thank you so much for
Yay.
your time.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. And stop video. Okay. All right. We don't have to get off. I just had to stop
Oh, sure.
recording.